the Africans were actually the original Arabs. He doesn't say that, but not, of course, not all Africans, but a lot of Africans did occupy early Arabia. And like Diop said, this was basically a Negro colony or a black colony up until recently. Up until the 16th century or the 1500s, the Chinese manuscripts say that the entire area of Hijaz was occupied by very dark purple complected people. And that's the area between Jeddah and Mecca and Medina. That's what they said. 100 years before that, Al-Dahabi said the same thing, that the area of Hijaz, the holy land of the Arabs, was occupied by people that were Qatar, again, nearby, and that if there was a fair-skinned person in the area, it was assumed that he was from one of the slaves of Syria, Turkey, or the Byzantines. A lot of people were brought in from Central Asia. That means Afghanistan, Tabaristan, Tajikistan, were brought in to work the mines of Central Arabia. And also the Yemen. They were brought in, before that they were brought in to fight against the Abyssinians that were trying to take over parts of Yemen as Christians, But so these people are the ones that are now claiming to be, the Arabs. And every time the sources speak of Berbers, they always refer to them as black. I'm talking about whether you're talking about the Sanhaja, Asmuda, the Tama. There were like 5 major confederations of Berbers, and they're always said to have been black. They never say, oh, this person were red or anything like that.
Yeah, wonderful to have you on the show. I think one of the first questions I actually have is in terms of what I perceive as dispensations when it comes to the word moor, because you have the word moor and then people try to apply this kind of blanket perspective like it's meant the same thing throughout time. But from my research, it feels like there, at least from what I've gathered, about 3 different dispensations. You correct me on this, by the way, but these are roughly what I've come up with. There's a dispensation where it talks about Maori people who, from what I can see, are Northwest African. Then you have an Islamic dispensation, so I would say post Muhammadic or Islamic dispensation, which kind of goes hand in hand with then the invasion of Iberia. And then you have a post-Andalusian dispensation, which I would say start from the medieval era onto early modern era. So, and the word moor, from my understanding, seems to mean a different thing in each of those different dispensations. How fair would you say that is? And does that, where have I made errors? So if I look a bit funny, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the classical period, with the European classical authors talk about the Moors differently than they do in the in modern era. For example, Strabo apparently said that the Moors called themselves Moors. That it wasn't, at that time it didn't mean black, although in the medieval period it came to mean the black man, basically. So that's why you could see Africans, you could see Arabs, who at that time, because of course were mostly black. And, even people as far away as India referred to as Moro in European society. And it's, even in the Crusader period, you have the Moors described as black, black as soot and that kind of thing. So originally this name is an indigenous name, Maori, used by the Romans and Greeks, for certain people in West and Northwest Africa, or basically Northwest Africa, because that's where the Romans had settled and they were familiar with those people. In the Targum, Jonathan, early Targums, they say the word Mari or the Mori were actually the tribe of Rama. So that word might be related to the word Rama, which is also used for the Blemis of Nubia, who are connected to ancient Arabians in Yemen. So, but it's important to understand that the ancient Moors and people, that occupied North Africa at that time were not the same as modern peoples in North Africa. And in the medieval period, they were mainly the same people that were known as Berbers, and sometimes as Arabs, because the Arabs from Arabia at that time were basically the same people, or an extension. The Berbers were actually an extension of the peoples of Arabia, and Kush, which was in Arabia, Canaan in Arabia, and so the Kush people, these people called Kush, Rama, Saba, Sabteka, were on both sides of the Red Sea. The Gaetuls, according to Josephus, came from the Gaetuls, I'm not sure if you know, are the people that became the Mauritanians, Moors and Mauritanians. According to Josephus, they were from the Havila, the traders between Somalia and the Yemen. So basically, you're talking about peoples who are considered Afro-Asiatic, Afro-Arabian, not just, they were always considered to have been people from the Yemen. Originally, when I'm talking about that period, I'm talking about thousands of years ago, not even, the Christian era, the classic era, but, 1,000 years BC we're talking about, and before that time. Because in their traditions, they said they were actually pushed out of Canaan by Joshua, which is Joshua son of Nun, or the Joshua of the Hebrew Torah, Hebrew Bible. And the people that are descended from the Berbers actually were two major peoples, namely the people called Zagai, otherwise known as Zagawa or Azuag or Songhai, as well as the Tuareg peoples, Tuareg who wear the veil, the Tamashek or Amazigh people, from which comes the modern name Amazigh. Okay, so that name was just adopted in the 20th century by modern North Africans.
So Amazigh comes from Tamashek.
Well, it comes from Amazigh, which is the Imashag, or Amazigh is the name found across the Tuareg, different, versions of the same word. And Tamashek really means just belonging to the Masik or Mashek people.
Okay, brilliant.
And that name actually goes across into Arabia, like most of these names. A lot of people don't know the Mazexos or Mashik also were found in the area of Jordan and in the kingdom of the Nabataeans. So that is why it's important to take seriously the claims of these Berber people that they also originally came from Canaan, and the Philistine area.
Thank you very much. You expanded on a lot there. So I've got about 4 different branches. Thank you so much, where I could go down. I'm going to ask the first question because that was one of the earliest points that you made. And the argument has been made that the term Moor is an exonym, i.e. something that's been applied from the outside,
right,
and given to the Moorish people, or given to the people of Northwest Africa. But you're saying quite clearly there that it was an indigenous name was picked up and then came to mean something else over time.
Yeah, that's what Strabo said. So we can, kind of try to take that for what it's worth. But there were, in the Roman text, they talk about the Moori Berbers, or Bebar, and the Moori Maziks, or of course the Amazigh, Tuareg people, the Moori Bakots, or Berguada, who were the people who later became known as Masmuda, and the Moori Kankajanchani, or the five peoples. So those were specific groups of these peoples that lived between mainly Tunisia and Morocco, extending down into, I guess they later extended down into what's now called Mauritania, or Spanish Sahara. But yes, those were, Moor did not apply originally to all Black people, although it did come in Europe to mean the black man. just like Niger, just like Kush, and just like Qatar. Those names all came to mean, or Habesha meant the black man. Ethiopian came to mean the black man, but even that term wasn't originally, meaning that.
Brilliant. Thank you. One of the things I've heard you say and expand upon, and it got me very excited because it's exactly the same conclusion that I've come to. It's going back to that term negro, which you picked up on, being an indigenous term first of all. And I've made the same argument. I've said that the negro comes from the Niger. These are people who were surrounding the Niger River, the Niger being an indigenous name for that river. And basically the word evolving, the etymology of the word changing over time from negrita to nigero to then negro, which was then picked up by the Spanish. So it wasn't a label that was placed upon black people, but it was an indigenous name that meant something that then evolved. Even Sudan is another name for that's come to mean black people, but prior to that had a root in something else. So I'd love for you to just actually take a little bit of time to expand on that term negro, just because I feel it draws a wonderful parallel to exactly the debate we're having regarding moor. And I could see us in 100 years debating over whether or not Negroes were black, and people will think that's really bizarre, but actually it could take exactly the same evolution. But anyway, I want to give it to you to have that discussion.
Yeah. Well, just to make clear, I'm not sure if that is something that needs to be argued about, maybe in among laymen and stuff. But it's basically known that the Romans used the term Negritae in Niger for peoples that were settled along the Niger or River Niger, the Great River, which was actually an Afro-Asiatic word. Gur meant river in the Semitic and Cushitic and Hamitic dialects. But there's also one thing that's interested me is that there's also people called the Kanuri that were settled in the area also called Nigeri. So I'm not sure if that name is related, or if this name was also the root of the word Nigritai, but the Kanuri are people that were actually related to these Berber Songhai people I was talking to you about. So in the end, the ancient negro is the Spanish for Niger. Yeah, Niger is a word for the river, or the Great River, and actually it was sometimes called the Nile because it was, ran apparently further eastward towards the Nile. Yeah.
It shows actually shows on medieval maps, strangely enough. You can see a connection between the Niger. So that drying up could actually be much more recent than people suggest.
Right. Well, actually, the archaeologists do suggest that it was, in Roman times, a lot of this stuff due to the salt treaty. But as I was saying, Spanish for Niger is negro, and the German negar, and the British was the same, except in the South they pronounced it nigger. But it became a negative word, or the connotation became negative because of the people that were using it, and how they were using it, to when people were being hanged, all that nigger, that kind of thing. So yes, this is an indigenous word, like most of the words, and it did not mean the black man originally. It referred to the Great River, most likely.
Okay, you're back. Brilliant.
On my last video too, it might be my side.
Yeah, it could be my side. My internet has been severely playing up recently, but there you go. All right, so wow, there's a lot to build off there. So I mean, just going back, because you know what I said about arguing about the whether or not negro means a black person, and the reason I literally had a revelation today, because if you look at it, the evolution of the two words is actually very similar. They both have geographic origins. They're then both picked up to basically broadly mean a certain people, but then the words then get restricted to a different area. So more becomes associated with Europe, and now Negro is more associated with America than any other land.
Yeah.
But then the Moors do certain things and create certain things, such as the Americans. Black Americans have created certain things like rock and roll, hip hop, this, that, and the other. And what would historians do? They'd find a picture of Eminem and a picture of what's his name, Elvis Presley, and then they'll go, "Oh, look, these people were also rappers and musicians, so therefore they are Negroes." And you can clearly see, and look, we found a mixed picture of slaves, so they must be Negroes. That's the kind of logic they use. It's exactly the same, isn't it?
That could, happen in a few centuries.
Yeah.
Decades even.
They'll find a picture of Asians using the N-word against each other.
And when they're starting that, actually.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley, however, unknown to most, was actually a Melungeon part.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's why he could dance like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I knew that rhythm came from somewhere because he had a little something, didn't he, Elvis? He had a little something. Oh yeah, okay. So that makes a lot of sense.
You'd be surprised people over here that were part African.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that does make sense. So yeah, it's just very interesting. Yeah, in 100 years' time, we could be having this same debate about another word. So, yeah, let me move on from that anyway. So, is there any evidence of, this is an important question now, actually, and I'm going to allow you to expand on it as much as you like. How much evidence is there for the term Moor being used exclusively as a pseudonym for the term for Islam? Essentially, basically, them saying, well, that's the Muslim, so therefore we're Moor.
Well, that just came after the 17th century predominantly in Europe. I mean, or not even in Europe, but in Spain and in some of these southern countries that, where the people actually it more likely became a term for pagan, not just Moor, not just Muslim, but a pagan. That wasn't even until after, long after the Moorish dynasties were in Iberia. So I don't even worry about that era. I don't really study it because, like I say, I'm more concerned with the authentic people that were called Berbers and Arabs or Arabians. And those people were African in appearance and in cultural origin and civilization. There was a whole civilization between the Nile Valley and Arabia thousands of years ago that people don't even talk about. That from which came these Semitic-speaking people, these Berber-speaking, Cushitic-speaking peoples that were Afro-Asiatics. So that's mainly what I study about. And in order to study that, you have to know who their descendants were. Their descendants were these black people called Berbers, the Masmuda, Sanhaja, Katamas, Zanets or Zanata, Hawara. Okay, and so I deal with researching who exactly they were from historical sources, as well as who the Arabs were. But not only that, their connection to these biblical peoples, the Torah, the Genesis, because that in itself actually encompasses all who these people were, including Japhet. So the folk of Noah, according to early Muslim sources, were these people in southern Arabia that originally worshipped Suwa and Yaguth and all these Sabian deities. And then later on, as in the Abbasid period, or Abbasid, I don't know how to pronounce it, after the 8th century, you start to see these Central Asian or Iranic peoples, late Persian peoples come in and start distorting the allegories concerning who these Arabians were. The Qatan or Joktan people, Ham, Shem, Japhet. Those are originally peoples of Arabia, black peoples living there, many of who are still there and in Africa today. So that's what concerns me, and that's what I think people should try to get in their head that it's not about, you can't argue with certain things. Okay? There's skeletons that show who the people were, just like in ancient Egypt. I mean, the predominant skeletal type was the same type that was south in certain areas of Nubia and Ethiopia, especially in the later periods. So that's not even an argument either. That's why I don't know if you're familiar with Afro-Asiatics Blogspot, which is my main, that's where I have a lot of information with regards to, for laymen, even though a lot of people think that's even hard to understand. But so
where can I just really quickly find the studies that have the bones? Those are on the Blogspot.
Yeah.
Is there numerous, or is there ones that stand out in particular?
They're all basically saying the same thing. That what happened was that early on they noticed that the peoples in Somalia, in the Taita peoples in further south, further south of the Horn, Kenya, a lot of those people had the same skeletal type as the ancient Egyptians and people in North Africa. So they called them by different euphemisms, like the gracile Mediterranean type or the gracile Mediterranean race, and even Eurafrican, because these people were not considered black. They were considered to be darkened Caucasians or dark Caucasoids, and they created these names. And later on, it was, then they started creating, after actually I went to get my first master's at the University of Chicago, they started genetics or biological anthropology, which wasn't really even out when I went. It was not being perfected as it is now. And even after that, they found that, for example, the blood types of the Haritan out in Morocco were the most similar to the ancient Egyptian. Okay. And so another DNA studies found that the certain West Africans were related to certain dynasties, the 18th century and 17th century, and the peoples of the Great Lakes were connected to them. So, but what happens is that a lot of these people that are studying in Egypt and North Africa, they go into certain towns where had always been predominantly slave or foreigners settled, as in they do in Egypt and this place, I forget what it's called, but they go there and they say, oh, genetically these people are, they're light skinned, but they're connected to these people that they've always been connected to Anatolians or whatever. And it so happens that these people are different than the predominant population of ancient Egypt. The same thing as in what they did in Morocco. They went to Meknes and the other slave capitals where the white slave trade was predominant, and they studied those people there now, and they said, oh, people resemble French people or British, and then Sami people up in Russia, the Slavic area, or whatever. So, and then they tried to pretend that those are, or at least the laymen try to pretend that those are the predominant peoples of those regions, or were the predominant peoples of those regions. So that's how things get distorted. The same thing, Grafton Elliott Smith, an Australian anthropologist that created this term, the brown race, for people like Somalians and Ethiopians and Nubian, Beja, and ancient Egyptians, said that the entire Neolithic civilization was of these same people. And, the entirety of Arabia, the Indus Valley civilization up to the Zagros and the earliest Mesopotamian civilization and Syrian were all the same brown, so-called brown Mediterranean race, or gracile brown Mediterranean race. And then what happened was people started getting upset because those skeletons and cranial types were found in the for example, around Stonehenge and places of that sort.
Oh yeah.
So they said, oh no, there's no such thing as diffusion, and like again, they started creating these different euphemisms for people and saying, oh, well, all people with long heads belong to the same race. And
Oh man, yeah. I've done a whole. You know what? We are resonating here because I've literally been touching on the whole anthropometric study of like craniometrics and dolichocephaly, and how much they clung on to that in the the late 19th century, and then abandoned it suddenly when they realized that it was basically telling them that everyone was black. It's like, oh no, this is no longer an aerial study we want to look at.
Exactly, and I did actually another article about that myself, called "The Myth of the Mediterranean Race," and that was an Egypt, child of Africa. And some people said, some academics said, well, oh, we already know that. We already know that, and yet they still use that term. After my article, for peoples in ancient Arabia and that sort. So.
I'd like you to watch my video, my latest video. I'll send you a link of it. It's basically a discussion regarding the race of Tutankhamun, but I've focused in on him as an individual because we've got genetics, we've got anthropometrics, we've got craniometrics, we've got everything.
Yeah,
and everything obviously points to exactly what you've just been saying there. Very much regional, Nile-dwelling African. That's what everything tells us.
Right.
But I think you'd enjoy it. Because I think you'd enjoy the video. I will send it to you.
I almost got into a public argument fight in the University of Pennsylvania near me, which the curator there is the one that put out this forensic representation of Tut as a white. I don't know what he looked like, some kind of white girl.
What's the name of them? Because I'm familiar with a lot of them. They know me,
No, the curator of the University of Pennsylvania Museum. I can't think of his name right now, but
Michael Habicht. It's not him, is it?
No.
Okay.
No, I can't think of. But Zahi Hawass, who I knew was having a lecture there, and then he signed some books, and I was trying to ask him about where this tour came from, and then the curator who actually was sponsoring Zahi came up to me and started, and I asked him, who was responsible for putting this out, and he said I was, and he got kind of nasty with me, and people were looking in the museum, and as if there was going to be a fight started. So I kind of I didn't want any police coming after me, the black woman. So,
oh my God.
That was what was that, 10 years ago or 15 years ago? And Zahi told me that I looked the same.
That man is insufferable. You worked for him, didn't you?
Well, I translated some text for him. I was more his friend at that time. I translated some text.
I'm surprised he managed to sustain a friendship with a black person. From what I know, but he seems awful.
He has more. He looks at people in terms of like the old colonial rhetoric with regards to Africa, and not only that, the Turkish, because the people that came into Ottoman Egypt were very racist. The Turks were racist, and he claims to be descendants from the pharaohs and the high.
He's a Turk. He's a 100% Turk.
Yeah, well, no, he's probably part Greek too. But
yeah, I don't know if he even goes that deep, because if you look at him, he's got that typical flat black brachycephalic head. His hair is dead straight. Most of the Egyptians who go back as far as the Greeks, even like the ones who are paler, I can always resonate. I can tell when I'm meeting another African, even if they're racist and they don't know they're African.
Right.
I'm like, you're an African. You know what I mean? And I feel that a lot with loads of Egyptians. Okay. Not with him. I feel like with him, he's like straight Turk.
Well, he's definitely he's not completely African, but his hair. If you saw his hair, you'd see, and he has that streak of hair that of gray that some Africans have in East Africa, So
Okay.
whether he likes it or not.
You're making a good argument for him.
Well, he's part African, but he hates Africa. He
Oh.
very racist jokes, said some very racist jokes to me. I won't say here.
Well, look, I've got, let me show you something. So I bought this book, Scanning the Pharaohs, which you've probably seen. I didn't tell you, a lot of my work centers around, I do reconstruction work.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I do reconstruction work, and I know that he's seen my stuff because a lot of Egyptologists have seen my stuff. There's a reconstruction artist called Cesare Marias who's doing all of the new ones. So I don't know if you've seen the latest Amenhotep I, the latest Tutankhamun, which was done in 2023. Yeah, he's done like a lot of he did the Amenhotep III. You know, the one that came out recently where he made him look like a fat white man.
Oh, I never saw that, and I don't want to see it.
Yeah, so there's one came out this year, and he made Amenhotep III look like a fat white man. So I can tell you two things. The first thing is he did that in response to my reconstruction of Amenhotep III that I had done a few months before.
Yeah.
Just like his Tutankhamun, he did in response to my Tutankhamun, which went viral. And secondly, that's what prompted me to write my paper. So I've done a paper called Reassessing the Reconstruction of Amenhotep III, where I've directly addressed him. But it's quite a long paper. It's like, I don't know, about 15,000 words or something. It's quite a long paper, and I really thoroughly break down all of the problems in his process. So, but we have kind of like we like each other but don't like each other, because it's very much academic, but he's constantly messaging me, and sometimes I'm like, leave me alone, man, I'm busy, you know. But he's constantly messaging me, and he messaged me to complain about the fact that Zahi Hawass has actually blacklisted him. He's desperate to be accepted by Hawass, but Hawass has blacklisted him because he did a reconstruction of Nazlet Qatar as a black person, which is the 35, yeah. You know, Nazlet Qatar, the 35,000-year-old Egyptian mummy they found, like really old. So he did a reconstruction. Obviously, it's going to be a black person. Doesn't know why people existed back then. But he did a reconstruction, made him look black. And then since then, Hawass is like, you're done. So he messages me and shows me the messages that Hawass sends him, and it's hilarious. Because Hawass hates him. But then I'm like, well, mate, all due respect, your reconstruction was horrible. Don't come to me for pity. You know, when you start actually respecting African diversity, then we can have a discussion. So the last discussion I had with him was, I said, before you do your next reconstruction, why don't we discuss me and you doing a link up? And I can, because a big problem with what he does, one, he is a bit dishonest, I'm not gonna lie. I think he wants to pander to the Egyptian people because that's how he's gonna get paid. But two, he doesn't have, like most Eurocentric people, and actually like a lot of black people, he doesn't understand African diversity. So they very much have a true Negro perspective of what African looks like.
Can I just ask you, I mean, when you say, I mean, is he forensic? Is he forensically trained, or?
He uses a forensic method, but it's his own method. It's very much all digital. So it's based on him rebuilding the skull in his digital environment and then making it from there. But I don't rate his process, and his reconstructions are horrible. But then all forensic artists, all their reconstructions are horrible. And I've actually debunked the entire field because it's very biased, but I understand how the bias comes about. It's because they don't use African tissue data. They don't understand African tissue. They don't try to understand it. So they're only ever going to come up with white people using their process, basically. The Manchester, there's different methods. So you have like the Manchester method, which kind of uses pins around the skull, and then the Russian method, which layers the muscles on. But the problem is all of these methods rely on you having an idea of the ethnicity, because different ethnic groups have got basically express tissue data very differently between ethnic groups. So if you've decided from the start, I'm making a modern Egyptian, which is what a lot of them do, then you're going to come out with a modern Egyptian. Even if it's got a deformed face, it's still going to be a modern Egyptian. Even if it doesn't match the African skull, it's still going to be a modern Egyptian. You have to use the anthropology to decide the ethnicity before, and none of them want to use the anthropology with ancient Egypt because they know what they're going to get.
You mean you have to be trained in forensics really to understand, and also the background of Africans, the ethnic background of Africans. You have to know something about that.
Yeah, I think the field is a joke. I'm going to be honest with you. I've studied it very, very heavily, and I've written pretty much. I've read every paper that Carolyn Wilkinson's published, and I've gone through a lot. So she's the one who did the Fayum reconstructions. She recently did King Richard III, and
I'm not into I don't deal with that area at all. So
yeah, that's kind of my area. But
it's not scientific. I mean, I don't know.
It's not. That's the thing. It's not, and that's the one thing I want to expose to people. Like, say, look, this is an art, an area of art. It is not scientific whatsoever. They're selling it as science, but that's just their opportunity to then steal African heritage. You know what I mean? And say, oh no, but this is what science told us. It's like, how can you pull out King Tut's obviously Nilotic? He even still looks like a boy, a Nilotic boy to this day, and then just plaster these features on him and tell me it's science. It's like, get out of here. Like, what? Was I born yesterday? Sorry, I'm ranting. Let me move on.
Worth really, arguing with people over things that are not provable. I mean, that's their opinion, So I don't get into that.
I feel that.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, that the problem is they present it as science. That's the problem. And then you're having to convince even Black people to say, no, this is not, which is what I spent a lot of time on my channel doing, saying, look, no, this is not a science. Okay. So trust the portraits, not what they've created, because the portraits will tell you what his face looked like.
And it's just like if you go back and, like I said, about going into North Africa and seeing the depictions of ancient Berber kings, the sculptures that were done in Byzantine era, and even the coins of around the world that were being traded in ancient Saba and things of that sort. People put them in their black spots and things, and claim that these are the ancient Sabians and stuff. So yeah, you can't do that, and you have to know where people are coming from. That's why I try to deal with the either physical anthropology and the documentation, for example. So if Strabo said the Moors were black, or Strabo said that East Africa, east of the Nile, was all Arabia. There's a reason for that, because the people of Arabia and the people of the Peninsular Arabia were the same, and the names were the same. So that's why I focus on that kind of thing. And even genetics has been distorted by people
absolutely
going into like modern Yemen or modern Arabia. Are the Semitic peoples? No, they're not the Semitic peoples. Semitic peoples live in Africa, and that's where Afro-Asiatics linguistic group came from before they started settling in Asia, which was thousands of years ago, thousands of years BC. And you can't always look at the sculptures and things, because some of them come from the wrong periods or were done by other people. Just like here we have people in America and Europe presenting Jesus as, a certain Italian looking man.
Yep.
Of course, you probably wouldn't look like, but so I wouldn't focus on that. I mean, I don't focus on that. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think,
what questions do you have concerning my field?
Yeah. No, let's carry on. So we've got a long way to go still.
That's good.
What geographic area encompass the Maori or the Mauritanian people of antiquity? So if we're talking about the people that Strabo, you said, defined, what geographic area are we talking about? What evidence do we have in terms of what he was referring to?
Well, the classical Roman and the Byzantine and the Greek peoples refer to various peoples across the area of Africa that they came in contact with as Moors. As I say, the Blemis of Nubia were called, the Blemis, date back between 5th century BC and 5th century or 6th century AD. But, the Byzantines, which were after the Roman era, or they're called the Greco-Romans, okay? This early period after the 2nd century AD, they referred to the Blemis of Nubia as Moors. Mostly Moors referred to peoples that extended between Tunisia and Morocco, which was the Maghreb. Okay, so those people that were in the Maghreb, today we call them Berbers, and that includes, as I was saying, the Zagawa or Zagai peoples. Songhai actually also includes the Gara or Gorain peoples, also known as Wangara or Soninke further west. Those people are the early founders of Ghana, okay, founders of Wargla in Algeria. So the Jainawa or Gnawa peoples, for example, who are Soninke-related peoples, extended between Wargla and the Atlantic for thousands of years. I mean, before, the Christian era. So Moor encompassed, the entirety of the Atlantic, like the West Atlantic coast, as well as the Atlas. Okay, the Atlas were the Hesperians or Berber people called Masmuda. And of course, the Masmuda were called black and black skinned up until medieval times, as were other Berbers. But so basically it was for the Greeks and Romans, it was indigenous African Berber people, Berberi or Beribra peoples, as well as Tuareg peoples, the so-called Neo-Berbers, who occupied the area that they came in contact with. Okay. Later on, the Arabs, the Arabian Sulaim Hilal invasion brought in a lot of the indigenous Arabian people who were also black, and they came to be called Moors by people like the Portuguese. So,
thank you. That was very in-depth. I've got another question to ask you, actually, and this one isn't one that I've gotten written down, but I think based on some of the things you said, it would be good to get your feedback on this. If being someone who understands African phenotypic diversity and the fact that geographically there are kind of differences that occur. If I was to say, take your typical Habesha person, your typical kind of like Habesha East African person, perhaps modern day, who you would have said would have been, who I'm assuming would have been typical of your Sabian type person, and compare them. I could be wrong there. Correct me if you will.
A little wrong.
Okay, great. Feel free to correct me. And then if I was to make the comparison then with your modern day Mandinka, Soninka person of West Africa, all of these people you've mentioned as possible contributors to the kind of Moorish element, or the people who are classified as Moors.
Right.
Is there a distinction to be made? Is there what's the separating point? Which part would you say would have been more the Habesha type, and which part would have been more the... I'm just trying to get a bit of clarity in my mind as to how this works, or was it all one mixed conglomerate? That's the question, I guess.
You're talking about when you talk about the Moors?
Yeah.
They were, as I say, the Zagawa or Songhai people were definitely connected to the peoples now in Eritrea called Baria. They were called in the Zagawa still call themselves Bari or Baria. That is where the word Beri comes from, or al-Barabir in Arabic, which became Berber in English. But according to the documents about the Masmuda, for example, they were a large, robust people. I have pictures of some of the Masmuda, actually. the real Berbers from Morocco on my Facebook page. They were said to have been a large people and black-skinned. They're the people I think that were connected to certain Soninke and Mandinka peoples that settled southward. So what happened was, and the Tuareg, of course, the real nobles of the Tuareg are over 7 feet tall. So that's another group. You also find in Arabia, you find very tall, gigantic, 8 feet tall people just documented in Arabia. Okay, and that's why you have all this biblical stuff about giants and all this kind of thing. But anyway, these people, before they even came over to Africa, some of them may have mixed, over there. Now you do have the Gorain or Quran people who are probably closest related or the closest phenotypically to peoples called Gorain and Kara in East Africa and Southern Arabia today. So that's one group, but the so-called Habesha Amharic Tigray Somali type, this Grasshopper type, was not the only black type in Arabia. There were giant, huge people. You'll still see some of them in Central Arabia with very big but plattering noses, giant built, stocky people that you won't even find in Africa. And you find very small, 4 feet and something people in Arabia today. It's my view that some of these people were already mixing in Arabia before they came over to settle in places like the Elephantine, Aswan area, which is where you get the name Swanik, Aswanik, or something like that. And that's why you have this kind of diversity of African. The diversity stems from very ancient times, but that's why you don't really have much anthropological evidence of West African, in West Africa, of African peoples, because first of all, a lot of these people were further north, and that later became Sahara. They came from further north and even from North Africa and settled in Ghana. Was the area of what's now called Mauritania. That was the town of Ghana. So these Soninke people and the Bafur peoples that founded, otherwise known as Genoa, living between Ouargla or North Africa, Numidia, and what's now called Mauritania. These people are those that settled southward and adopted the Mand language, because originally they spoke Nilo-Saharan. The Soninke is like the Songhai spoke Nilo-Saharan. The Songhai, some people think their language was even more Afro-Asiatic, and then they adopted, Nilo-Saharan.
Would you include the Hausa in that as well?
Hausa. Well, the Hausa actually are a mixture of those different groups, and probably indigenous groups as well as Fulani groups, who are another story too. Another Afro-Asiatic people originally. But the Hausa name itself was often written as Habesha. So that's where that word comes from. So that whole empire.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The Hausa were originally considered part of that Habesha group. That's why you have the common Bari there, or the Bari peoples. Bornu Sahara, the name Bornu means land of the Berbers. If you look up Britannica, land of the Berbers, Encyclopedia Britannica will tell you that. So Beri is the name I said for these people called Albarabir or Soninke Songhai. That is where the word, it's an indigenous word. It has nothing to do with, it does have something to do with the word barbarian, because the Greek word barbarian also comes from the word to spout or to mouth. And in Zagawa, for example, the word beri still means the mouth. So in the ancient Afro-Asiatic dialects, the word beri means to spout fount or fountain, to spring forth, that kind of thing. So originally the word barber or babble,
Yes.
barbarian,
Yeah.
barbarian, they all come from the same, etymological origin of to speak or to speak an unknown dialect, that kind of thing. Of course, barbarian came to mean somebody who was uncivilized, that kind of thing. But Berry or Berry Bra, as they're still called, Baria, those words have ancient Afro-Asiatic origins.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's
Exactly what academics that looked at my book, I don't know if you've heard of it, the African and
Can I buy it?
African and Arabian origins of the Hebrew Bible.
Can I buy it?
Online, yeah, but the other one is pretty expensive.
Yeah, send me a link. I love books, so yes.
Yeah.
I'll be tempted, I think. I probably will buy it. Actually, on that note of books, I recently purchased a book by Nell Painter. I'm sure you're familiar with her. Excellent work on the origin of the white race. She's got a book.
No.
Oh my gosh, yes. I thought you would for sure. She covers the Circassian slave trade and all of that in excellent detail.
Is she African?
Yes. Yeah. She's a Black American.
Well, as long as it's not, as long as it's objective, I'll look at it. But now the problem is that
No, she doesn't do that. She doesn't do that.
The problem is there was originally a lot of, the Arabs, the earliest slaves were white. Slavic peoples, Assyrians. When I'm saying white, I'm talking about the people that they called the red people or the pink people, because they didn't use the word white for Europeans, but for themselves. So the red people, these people, the Circassians, other Slavic peoples, Turks or Turkmenistanis, and the Iranic early Persian people were all considered slaves by the earliest Arabs. And they're the people that took over some of these allegories about Ham, Shem, and Japheth and Canaanites being black and all that stuff, and actually replaced themselves, put themselves in the place of these, Semites, so-called sons of Shem and sons of Japheth and stuff like that. But I'm interested in seeing what is the book about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that. So it's called The Origin of the White Race. I think it's downstairs, so I'm not going to run and get it. But it's an excellent book. She just basically covers in detail exactly what you're talking about there. The fact that the longest and oldest slave trade is the Caucasian slave trade, the one that took place in, essentially Western Asia, Eastern Europe, and that started conservatively at least. It went on for at least 2,000 years, and that's conservatively speaking, because we have Greek texts that basically talk about collecting people from that region, and it not being reflected in other regions. And she covers it in a lot of detail. It's an excellent book. So that's the reason I thought you might have come across her. She's an excellent speaker, much like you. Very, very very well regarded. Sorry, go on.
Peer reviewed?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
I'll
check her out. Nell Painter. Have a check. Which I think she is peer reviewed, but that could be. But she's still speaking at a university. Both times I've seen her, she's been speaking at universities. Yeah. So the reason I raise her is because I want to talk about that subject for a moment, just considering things like obviously the Circassian slave trade, the Barbary corsairs, all of these things that have contributed massively to what make the makeup of the modern North African person.
Right.
Whereas when blackness is seen, it's always considered, or it's always argued that it's kind of like, oh well, those were hired hands, or those were slaves, not the indigenous. Whereas the whiteness is never up for debate. It's like, well, here's a, this is what an Arab looks like, or this is what a Berber looks like. But it's almost like that entire history of slavery is just totally ignored, and those, that massive influx of, forced migration, you might want to call it, has had a massive impact on what the region looks like today. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, do you feel that's the case, and if so, why is it being ignored?
Well, we all know why it's being ignored. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure academics are open to looking at that more. But the problem is, a lot of geneticists, like I say, they're not familiar with that, that era, or the importance of the white slave trade in the era before the 15th century, or 16th century actually, especially when it comes to Arabia, because the early Arabs, they held fair skin in contempt due to the fact that most of their slaves were, fair in color, or so-called red people. I was just reading recently about the 4,000 heads of, not cattle, but humans that were brought into, I think it was Mecca, in the right after Islam, So up until the 9th century, that's why in the 9th century, Al-Jahiz was talking about how the slaves of the Sulaim were basically from the Ashban, who were, related to the Isbahan, or people of Central Asia, as well as their wives from the Byzantines, or concubines were from the Byzantines. So even that, but he said, but every third generation, or every third child, the original color of Banu Sulaim returns, meaning because he said they were black like lava. So the Banu Sulaim were part of the whole tribe of Qais Aylan, the whole confederation of tribes called Qais Aylan. And if you look at each of these groups, they're always called black. Qais Aylan means the northern Arabs, sometimes called the Arabs by adoption, but in reality they came also from the Yemen, most of them originally. But so Sulaim bin Mansur and Hawazin bin Mansur made up the majority of the groups of northern Arabia in the late as the 15th century. And these groups were described as black, or Qatar. So Qatar in that early Islamic period meant the noble Arab, or the unmixed Arab. It's related to the word Qatar, and that was the name of certain tribes like the Muharib and the Rabia, people that still inhabit Central Arabia. Now these people still inhabit north central Najd, or Najd, the area which is the central part of Arabia, except the word Qatar, still used for them now, is derogatory. It's the same as the N-word. So that just shows you how far things have been turned upside down.
Indeed.
Yeah, and even the majority of people in Iraq that are black are said to be Arabs, according to the Arab press service, from the Hawazin, from Beni Amr bin Zaza, the Muntafik tribe of the Kab. See, I know these groups by heart, so I can say it on and on. So, but the Beni Amr were the closely related to the tribes that had settled in Iraq. Up until the 17th and 18th century, were the rulers of southern Iraq. They're still black, or near black in color, and they're called, the Qatar, but they're said, the African Americans that go over there, of course, are trying to say, oh, these are the zanj, these are the descendants of slaves. But a lot of those, they're, according to the Arab press service, I put it all over the internet. 2/3 of the black people of Iraq are from these Arabs, and not only from the Arabs, but from the nobles of Hijaz, the Sayyidun from Hijaz. But they said that these people have mixed with other the other lighter skinned people, and their color has turned. Okay. But he said 1/3 of them were zanj. Now the term zanj has even gotten completely confused, because that referred originally to non-African peoples, but the early zanj in Iraq were not, most of them were not African. They were Arabs, and they were also Indonesians, the Tikfu. They were also Arabs, but they were the Kab tribe was considered zanj or zanuj. Okay, zanj really meant, it was an Iranian word meaning the rust-colored people. Okay, a lot of the zanj were not, but later on, this name became transferred to East Africa, where there were a lot of people that had customs like the zanuj, the Afar, and other people that were in Southern Arabia and in the Horn of Africa. For example, they sharpened their teeth. And some of these
the Afar people do that.
Yeah, so some of these people also settled further south, and the Zanj, East Africans, Central East Africans that were under the Muslim, rulership, I guess, started these practices, and everybody in that area became known as the Zanj. So that was there's even a Zanzibar in Yemen.
Yeah.
In Yemen. So that's
the Zanj had a very mixed population, didn't they? I was reading about it the other day. Like their preference actually was they liked light-skinned slaves, I'm told, in southeast of Africa. So the Zanj Empire extended almost all around it. So it extended to the east of Africa, didn't it? But then it was quite large, I'm told.
I didn't know it was extended to South Africa. That would be interesting to look at.
Well, southeast, as in Kenya, Tanzania.
Considered Central East Africa, yeah. So South Africa, I'm thinking you're talking about South Africa and Namibia and places like that. But yeah, Kenya and Central East Africa, yes, that's where the Zanzibar area is, yeah. But,
and I was going to say, I used to live in the Middle East. So I used to live in Qatar. And they have a very large black population there. I always talk about them because they are some of the most beautiful people that you ever meet in your life. Literally, they are, and very tall. So similar to what you were saying before. And they haven't got, I met a lot of, whilst I was out in the Middle East, I used to meet all types of people. This is before the Libyan invasion. So I used to meet North Africans, lots of people from Yemen, Oman. So you start getting used to the different, once again, phenotypes that you see. The Omani, the Yemenites, they give you very much a Sudanese feel. You'll kind of confuse them for like North to Central Sudanese people. Got that whole kind of range going on there. Then you get some that look a bit Habesha, but not many, to be totally honest with you. Most of them give you kind of more of a Sudanese vibes. But in Qatar, they look like African Americans. I swear, they look like African. And I know that's going to sound bizarre, but that's the closest group that I could think of for them. They look like African Americans, incredibly tall, incredibly good looking. But if you speak to them, they'll tell you exactly what you've just said there. They'll tell you that basically they're indigenous and they used to rule. They had rulership taken from them by the British. The British handed over rule to, and actually they imported a lot of Indians into Qatar. So Qatar was strange because they used. So a lot of the modern ruling family, like the Afanis, apparently they had their roots in India.
I know some of them personally. That's interesting you say that.
What's that, the Afanis?
I said, well, how can you be, if your mother is from India, how could you be royal? And he's like, they're like, well, I don't know. So maybe you're right.
Yeah.
Right. I thought he was trying to trick my friend.
No, they I actually used to teach. I went out there to teach, so I taught at independent school, but it was like the top one, so all of the royal kids used to go there. So I used to teach. I had an Althani girl in my form. That's the royal family. So I had one of the emir's granddaughters in my form. So yeah, they're quite open about their history when you're there and you speak with them. So it's weird because they do this thing, and you'll find this with it's weird that we're coming onto this subject because it's something that I've been contemplating. And what you'll find is that certain groups will really quickly deny their heritage and adopt the land that they move into within that generation. And I'll tell you this because I used to go to school with loads of Asian kids, Indian Asian kids, and a lot of them were basically recent migrants from Kenya/Uganda, because it was post the Idi Amin. I didn't know that when I was young, but I know that now. So you used to meet these Asian kids and they used to say, I'm Kenyan, or I'm Ugandan, this, that, and the other. And their parents will say I'm Kenyan, but their parents migrated into Uganda. They remember when they migrated into Uganda and left. So it's not even like it's several generations deep. But within that 1 year, that one generation of migration, they no longer classify themselves as Indian. They say, I'm Kenyan, I'm Ugandan. And you see this a lot in North Africa. So in Libya, for instance, a lot of people there are very recent Arabs, very, very recent Arabs. And they'll say, I'm Libyan. It's like they almost feel like they've got a right to claim any Arab-speaking nation as their own and completely discard their own history and claim that, and then say, no, I'm a true Libyan. It's like you literally know your parents came here. You know, it's like me saying, well, I'm the true Brit. You know, it's like, no, I know my mum migrated. Yeah, I'm Nigerian. I can't suddenly decide that I'm more native than someone who's 6, 7, 10 generations deep.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have no problem with people doing that as long as they're not trying to take other people's history.
Which is what they do.
Yeah, that's not good. Because I know, for example, where Libya is now, this place called Misrata. Well, if you go on my Facebook site, you will see that the different towns in North Africa in the 19th century and the early 20th century that were occupied almost totally by Black people, and now completely taken over by other people. And those are the people that are saying, oh, the Africans are slaves, or they're taking Africans as slaves. Actually, in Libya, I know that.
They are. Sirte, where Gaddafi was from, the city of Sirte was filled with dark-skinned Africans like me. That was his hometown. That's why they completely obliterated it. Because if you look at old pictures, Sirte, you'll find nothing but the taboo people and people who look like me.
And that's why I guess he stood up for the Arab-African connection, because he was saying that the people in the Persian Gulf today, they speak Arabic with a Persian accent, and and that the Africans were actually the original Arabs. He did say that, but not, of course, not all Africans, but a lot of Africans did occupy early Arabia, and like Diop said, this was basically a Negro colony or a Black colony up until recently. That's why, and I'm not sure how much you know about the Arabian side of things, but up until the 16th century or the 1500s, the Chinese manuscripts say that the entire area of Hijaz was occupied by very dark purple complected people. And that's the area between Jeddah and Mecca and Medina. That's what they said. 100 years before that, Al-Dahabi said the same thing, that the area of Hijaz, the holy land of the Arabs, was occupied by people that were Qatar, again, nearby, and that if there was a fair-skinned person in the area, it was assumed that he was from one of the slaves of Syria, Turkey, or the Byzantines.
Wow.
I think there was also some Persia, but so the early Arabs before the 16th century, because a lot of people were brought in from Central Asia. That means Afghanistan, Tabaristan, Tajikistan, and all these other stannies. Okay, were brought in to work the mines of Central Arabia, and also the Yemen. They were brought in. Before that, they were brought in to fight against the Abyssinians that were trying to take over parts of Yemen as Christians. But so these people are the ones that are now claiming to be, the Arabs, and even in the time of there's an explorer named Charles Doughty, who is a famous Orientalist, colonialist era explorer. He went to Arabia and Hijaz, and he said that these people called the Hudhail Ibn Khuzaima, Ibn Mudrika, whose brother was Khuzaima. Okay, so there's Kanana bin Khuzaima, from which came the Quraysh tribe, Muhammad, the Prophet's tribe. Okay, he said that the Hudhail had black and shining skins. Now, if you go to a YouTube video today, and that's only 150 years ago, you will see no Black people among the Hudhail in that area. Yeah. So, So Burckhardt and other explorers that settled there said that the whole entire area of Hijaz was being flooded with foreign.
Yep.
So inundated. They used the word inundated and flooded. And he said that the people would try to marry Abyssinian women so that their children would look more like the Arabs. Okay, that's how different now. If you look at Mecca, it's on the same latitude as Sudan, south of Nubia. So this entire area of Hijaz and the same population in Hijaz were in Jordan and in Central Arabia. But what was happening was they were bringing in a lot of slaves, and these slaves are the what do they call not Abian. There's a special word for the slaves that were brought in, or the red people that were brought in into these regions and that were coming into the Yemen. In any case, they were the earliest in the Yemen. They were the earliest people to turn to Islam, and they came to be the noble class and the land-owning class because of Islam. And today, of course, these people are claiming to be descendants of the Hamdan and the early Arab tribes, and I guess they're the ones putting pictures of Sabians, with long hair and stuff, into Wikipedia, or Wikipedia as I call it.
Yeah.
So the Arabs in Arabia until the medieval period all had the same names as peoples on the opposite side of the Red Sea. And these are the biblical names. Okay. So all the tribes in Somalia, the Afar people were considered a large tribe in the Hadramaut area up until the 20th century. Do we see them there today? We see a few of them. Okay. But anyway, maybe you should ask questions. I don't know.
No, I love letting you expand, because it's just bringing up important points that we need to discuss. It makes me actually think about the fact that a lot of these changes, these shifts in the population, I think you touched on this, they can happen very rapidly. They're not necessarily things that have taken hundreds or thousands of years. I've got a video called 1925 on my channel, which is just basically based on old footage that I found in Egypt that was filmed in 1925. And all of the people who basically populated the Nile and still kind of lived along the Nile were black. All of them. They were either Saidi or they were Nubian, but they were all black, the people along the Nile. And the only place you would find these kind of fair-skinned Egyptians is in Alexandria and Cairo. But they've all, over the past 100 years, the expansion from those areas into the rural areas, since obviously, Egypt has become, the antiquities have become very profitable for the nation. They've expanded and pushed these people out, pushed them south, pushed them away. And there's not even people who have subsistence on the Nile anymore. The Nile's almost just being denied, that entire people who relied on the inundations of the Nile for their lifestyle, they've been totally neglected, and you've had these dams built, and it's just amazing. But the shift in the demographic has been very rapid.
Wow.
To now people are shocked to see black, black people in Egypt. It's like, no, everyone was black along the Nile, even to modern times, up until very recently.
Well, I have a few, I think, little posts on the Africa Resource site. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the Africa Resource site, talking about the different. I just posted a bunch of cut and paste writings of the colonialists and how they said, Alexandria and Cairo were occupied by the Turks. Okay, there were several 600,000 Turks, 60,000 Turks or something with their furs and stuff. And then there were the Fellahin, who were dark, who were described as dark brown in color and all that stuff. So, yeah, I'm not surprised because it's actually documented by the colonialists. Same thing happened in Sinai too. There was a Sinai.
Yes.
They said the indigenous people were extremely, dark brown, near black in color. So.
And Libya, I always say Libya looked like Sudan 150 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and I have that on my Facebook.
We've had numerous massacres, as you know, in Libya. Numerous massacres that have shifted the population. But even just before the very recent one, that was actually one of the reasons why I went. I told you I've been doing this for like 20 years, but one of the reasons I went very silent is in 2013 after the Libyan thing. I just kind of like gave up on the world almost. I was like, if this can happen in the modern era, you know, something that it was heartbreaking. It was it's took me a very, very long time to recover because obviously I knew Libyan people and I know firsthand how that nation has shifted so much. You know, they were hunting, thanks to your president, they were hunting people that looked like me who were indigenous in the street, you know, hunting them, putting them on, oh look, he's a rebel, he's a, you know, and that's gone on to this day. So literally people who are indigenous who look like me in Libya are either being put up for slavery or just in fear for their lives. Right. And that's happened in our lifetime, which is
that have been living shocking. There for thousands and thousands of years said that they are descendants of slaves and get out. Yeah, that kind of thing. Or they're being made into slaves. Yeah. But a lot of this is karmic, I have to say. I mean, a lot of it, what was going on with the the black people across, you know, these countries, they were in millions of Europeans for ages as well. I mean, if you look at what the Tuareg were doing, the Romans said that the Tuareg, especially with the women, you know, apparently they're like the European women, we're taking the Roman we're taking the Roman women from the Levant and, you know, making hybrids across North Africa. That's what Claudian said in his book about the Nabataean Berbers. Okay, the Tuareg is still, one of the clans of the Tuareg is still called Kel Inusamani. That's where the name Nabataean comes from. Of course, up until during the time of the sultans in Morocco, they were taking tens of thousands of slaves, European slaves, into the cities, like I said, of Meknes and other towns. So I guess one of the karmic retributions was not to have a history anymore.
That's an interesting perspective. Very interesting perspective.
If you look at it, I mean, because if you go back, it looks like every place that now other people have said it was theirs was actually originally black, especially when it comes to the Bible or the Torah. You know, all these tribes of Israel and Canaan and Edom and Moab, there were no other people mentioned in the Bible or in Genesis aside from these Afro-Arabian people, Afro-Asia. But, you know, they were taking so many slaves and making the concubines, not, you know, I have nothing against mixed marriage and all that stuff. I come from many threads, okay, lineages in Europe and stuff. I'm not worried about that. It's just that once you start making people slaves, let me fix my camera.
Sure.
Once you start making people into slaves, and, you know, mistreating them, dehumanizing them, this is what happens. You know.
Well, you have come to a similar conclusion that I came to. It's weird. It's almost like our histories have been given to each other. You know, that's kind of it is. That's kind of the conclusion I came to. It's kind of like, well, you take this and we'll take that. It's very interesting.
I don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, the histories have been swapped because if you was to ask who was the enslaved race a few hundred years ago, you'd get a very different answer to the one you get now. Yeah. So you've had a complete role reversal, right. But then I think that was necessary. Anyway, we're going on to a whole nother discussion. we could go there. I could really go into that one there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a specific question about Tariq ibn Ziyad and the initial conquest of Iberia. He's been depicted as though he was a modern white-skinned Berber. Do you have a difficulty with that depiction, or is that sound, or is that is there issues with that depiction?
No, because it's not sound, because he was supposed to have been of the Nafsawa Berbers. And the Nafsawa were, of course, connected to the Zenata. Even up until the 16th century, 15th century, Ibn Khaldun refers to the Zenata as the largest group of the Berbers. And he also says that in his time, which is only a few hundred years ago, people thought the Berbers were black due to slavery. Excuse me, the curse of Canaan, due to the curse of Canaan. Okay?
Okay, yes.
Due to the curse of Canaan. So you're talking about the Zenata of his period. The Nafzawa were of the Zenata Berbers, and actually their history can be traced, like I said, to the Tuareg and to the people called Zagawa or Zawaga, who still occupy, well, they did occupy Libya, but I guess not anymore, in Chad and Sudan. Okay, these are among the Nilo-Saharan people that later moved westward and took over, and then southward and took over the Mandinka dialects. So the Songhai and the Wangara Gorain people, also of Libya, Chad, who founded Garama and Garamese, otherwise known as Jerma, or the Garamantian civilization. Okay, so those people were also part of the Zenata Berbers. There were no, unless you were a descendant of a slave back before the 15th century, you're probably, or a slave soldier, because that's why the Masmuda leader, Ibn Tumart, said that his people, I guess this was 11th century or 12th, 11th century or 12th, after the Almoravid period of the Tuareg dynasties, he said the Masmuda people, children were being changed due to the slave soldiers coming in to collect taxes from the Moroccans. So from the Masmuda, their women were being taken advantage of in that period. And that's why their children's eyes were lighter and their skins were lighter. That's what he literally said. So that's a documentation. There's a book called something from Sigil Massa, book about Sigil Massa, one of the ancient Zenata Berber locales, and it talks about that. So, yes, slave soldiers that were coming in. And then later on, Andalusians came in the hundreds of thousands from, Iberia or Spain. Mostly converted people, not necessarily Moors, but mostly converts of various sorts.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no indication. Every time the sources speak of Berbers, they always refer to them as black. I'm talking about whether you're talking about the Sanhaja, Masmuda, Katama. There were like 5 major confederations of Berbers, and they're always said to have been black. They never say, oh, this person were red or anything like that. They do say sometimes, they use the word Abiad or Biad for Tuareg women, for example. They were considered the most beautiful women in the West Africa. So they talk about the women of this particular tribe, what's it called, who were white and pure. They're talking about a Tuareg tribe, meaning see, in Africa and in Arab sources, Abiad means white literally, but it refers to people that are the color of the Wodabe Fulani, the Ethiopians sometimes, or both black and white, or, Aswad and Abiad. The Igbo still call themselves white, some of them. So in medieval era, the term Abiad referred to something other than European or fair-skinned. It did not refer to literal whiteness. So
absolutely,
this word has been.
There were white Moors, weren't there? And a white Moor essentially was someone who had one black parent and one white parent. No, go on.
That's what I'm trying to tell you, is that,
no, go on.
that the word Abiad, or at least where it comes to Arabic sources, when they're saying white, they're talking about Tuareg tribes being white. They're talking about the color of the Tuareg and the color of the Wadabi Fulani, my color even, is considered white. Okay, sometimes the man would call themselves white because they refer to a cultural caste. The Marca, I don't know what people you come from in Nigeria. Were you a Nigerian or?
Yeah, I'm Nigerian and Yoruba, and I have many aunties who are lighter than you. Okay. Many uncles and aunties who are lighter in my family. It's very normal.
I know that, yeah, the Yoruba call themselves, sometimes they look down on very dark-skinned people. I know that from having Yoruba friends. And the Igbo too. They look down on, but those people aren't even white. The people that are fair skinned, like I have my mother too. She's like looks almost white. Those were not considered white in Africa. That was red. That's the color red among the Arab sources. Classical Arabic, the color of Europeans and Syrians and Iranians is red, not Abiad or Biad. So this is how things have become distorted by people claiming that, people talked about white Berbers and white Tariq and all that stuff. Now in England, I don't know if white Moor was ever used. Sometimes I know tani Moor was used, which meant like a mulatto person later on. But originally the word Moor or Maori in even England referred only to, black people. Same thing with Italy and Greece, where it's still a word for black people. The Portuguese used it up till a late period for black people. And I have a friend that, not an academic, but somebody who focuses on the origin of the term blackamoor and shows how that even originally referred to certain North African Moors, the original North African Moors. But so the term blackamoor is often said to be, there were both black Moors and there were other Moors. But that's not the case. That's a late, intrusive terminology for Africans. So that's why Haydn and Beethoven were called Moor and blackamoor and stuff like that, because they were dark-skinned people, but they weren't Muslim.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I've heard a similar thing, that the term blackamoor was referred to people who weren't Moors, so they would say black. It's almost like saying black as a Moor.
Well, that's what it's supposed to mean, yeah, but they interpret it as being black Moor.
Yeah, no, which is incorrect.
As being black Moor, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to put an image up on the screen really quickly and get your blood pressure going.
Just what I need.
Let me share my screen. Where is it? Okay, entire screen. There we go. So let me put it up. There we go. So this is from the. Once again, I've got the. So I'm trying to zoom out.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. With this picture.
From the Cantigas de Santi. Well, I can't remember what's called. This book that's referred to quite heavily.
Yeah.
Particularly on Wikipedia.
Well,
I'd love to go on.
Yeah, first of all, it doesn't say that those were people in Spain, but the other thing is that people have to understand there were other dynasties in Spain that were of Slavic and Turkish and Syrian origin. So even if those were, considered Moors, I mean, there would be no problem with me saying that, but it's already been found or discovered that the predominant people, the 900,000 Berbers that were there, were the predominant people of the Moors in Spain.
Yeah, so so this is called the Castilian, well, this is the caption they have here. It says, Castilian ambassadors attempted to convince Moorish Almohad king Abu Hafs Umar al-Mutada to join their alliance.
Okay.
And it says contemporary depiction from the Cantigas de Santa Maria.
Okay.
So is it a fair description to call this person a Moorish king? Or is it what's incorrect here? Is it the depiction or is it the description?
Was he called a Moor?
They've said Moorish. I'm assuming he was a king of an hour. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so as I just mentioned, I mean, there were many Muslim dynasties in Iberia that were not Berber or Arab. There were Syrians, Slavic, Persian. A lot of the writers of that period coming from Spain were not Arab or not Berbers. So Muslims could be any color in Spain. I mean, he could be, his mother could have been Arab or Berber too. I have, like you, have people in my family that look like that. But the point is that I'm pretty sure it's the this is the Cantigas or one of the one of the Alfonso documents that talks about the Moors being black as ink or something. So apparently at one time, even in Spain, the Moors were considered black as ink. So I don't know why these wicked people keep trying to, take away, not be authentic about.
Here's another one that will make you laugh. So this one, they've said in Wikipedia, Christian and Moor playing chess. Now I've looked into this image, and that caption they've just made up. Okay, this person is not called a Moor anywhere. They just basically seen some Islamic dress on them, like Europeans couldn't convert to Islam. And then said, well, it's a Moor because it's 1285 and he's wearing Islamic garb, so it must be a Moor.
Well, yeah, they can't stand to the fact that the word Moor referred to somebody that was literally a Negro, or somebody of African, especially sub-Saharan African descent. So I don't, I've seen these pictures many times before, and I don't, because all I know is that there are pictures of people that look like Africans, many depictions that look like Africans there. They're still wearing the same turbans covering their, their chins and things, the same exact clothing, even the same. Alfonso has two Moorish captives in his, two or three, that are still dressed like the Trarza Arabs, the Trarza of Senegal. They still have the same hair and same features. So we know that these people, the Moors, we know why the Moors are called black, because there were a group of people that were black that entered Spain. There were these Arabs, people were called Moors by the Portuguese until a late period. Even when they came to North Africa, they saw the dark-skinned people of Tunisia, the Arab Tunisians and people of that sort, and they called them Moors or Moro. Elliot Smith, I think, one of the people in, Grafton Elliot Smith said the only people that the Moroccans called Moors were the dark-skinned people with Negroid blood. So I don't know where this, I guess,
that's a really powerful quote. Sorry, where is that one in particular from? I'd love to hear that again.
Grafton Elliot Smith, and I'll look for it for you. Grafton Elliot Smith, he's the one that, like I said, had created the brown race myth or euphemism for people like Somalians and stuff like that, ancient Egyptians. So that word, even in Morocco, was used for people with Negroid aspect. So in certain South American countries, it's still used just exclusively for, like Moreno, is in certain places just for black people, not browns or brunettes like it is in other countries, but for black people. So at one time, even in Spain, the word black, I think I did that, I put that in the Fear of Blackness article that I was telling you about on the Moors. That was my major research that I did on the Moors since Golden Age of the Moor. And I talk all about that, how the term changed. So not only that there, but in the Gaelic sources, it talks about the Moor being the same, the word Moor being the same as Niger. as Niger, and the Mauritanians being the same people as the Negro.
When does that date to those Gaelic sources?
I think was that 9th century? I think that was the 9th or 11th, between the 9th and 11th century. It wasn't recent, that's all I know. So I have all that on my blog. And,
it's amazing because it just narrows. It's just narrowing down the the area of debate which you're doing so well without even knowing. So, for instance, you've given a very clear 9th century source where we have a definition for the word Moor, which basically says black people. We only have to go even to the early modern era, 16th, 15th century. We have definition that says Moor equals Negro from dictionaries from that era. So now you've got a small window of which I'm sure we can find more sources. And then where does the argument go from there? It's like it's like you said, it's bizarre that we have this standpoint and we have to almost surface this information, but it does need to be done, I guess.
Well, I don't know if you know, but on my blogspot I have a whole article about the descriptions of the Moors and what the Yoruba does until I have several articles really, but one of the last ones I posted was literally going through each century and showing how the Moors were described, and you know, I have pictures up there too of the more present day descendants of the Masmuda and other Berbers, you know. So
it is very thorough. It's not the most mobile friendly though, I will tell you that. So we need to
yeah, my blog.
Yeah.
But
we can work on that. I promise you, I'm very happy to volunteer my time and help you get that up and running properly.
I was going to say I'm not good with with technological stuff, and I need to order. And I just put something up recently about was it Israelites? No, about the Moors. But going through, I don't know if you saw that one, but going through the different ages. Where am I? I have to find your thing again. Oh, yeah, going through the different centuries. I think this was like one of my last posts. The post before my last one talked all about the Moors, you know, through the different ages and who exactly they were, who the Berbers were exactly, you know. Because that's one thing that people just skip over, the ethnohistory of the Berbers and Arabians.
You spoke a little bit, and I do want to get to kind of like pick at your expertise a little bit more, because you did speak a little bit about the ethnic makeup of both Morocco, but also the Iberian Peninsula. The fact that it wasn't exclusively black, there were other people there.
Oh yeah.
Can you just expand on what that ethnic balance maybe look like, maybe from like towards the from the invasion towards the fall of Andalusia, kind of like that period of time? What's your understanding of how that makeup looked?
Well, first, of course, we have to understand that a lot of the people that were indigenous to Spain, the white people, because there were also black people in the bottom of Iberia, the Moors that were still at the bottom even before the Muslim expansion. A lot of those people remain, you know, those Germanic related peoples were still there in Spain during the Muslim era. But there was a conquest, you know, and after the Islamic conquest and the Arabs moved across North Africa and settled there, the earliest Arabs were the Gafiki tribe of the Azd, who were described as black, and those are the people described as black as ink. So the early Gafiki leader, what was his name? Al-Gafiki. These are people that fought against, and mentioned in the Chanson de Roland and other sources, you know, fighting against the early European Normans. So the Hammer, Charles Martel, and people like that. Okay. when the Arabs came in, and then they came in with the Berbers. So Tariq and the Nafsawa, or Zanata Berbers, and all those people started coming in gradually. According to research, over 900,000 Berbers, nearly 1 million Berbers, had settled in Iberia over this period of several centuries. I know for a fact that the earliest Iranians and Turks in Iberia were called the slaves. I have that in my Fear of Blackness article. It's not coming from me, that's coming from other earlier scholars. But later, there were other dynasties, like I said, Syrian, Slavic, Persian, and of course the Arabs mixed a lot with the women. They liked the Franks, the Frankish women, and other white women. That's another thing that is documented, that they took women of the European background, or light-haired women. Byzantines do, in that area. But so in the I guess it was the 11th century, you have the Almoravids coming in as well. This is a large group of the Tuareg background, the Lamtuna and Sanhaja groups of Tuareg, who are also a mixture of the Sonic, because their vassal classes were often of Sonic origin. And you have these Lamtuna groups in Sanhaja settling in Spain. They're called the Philistine dynasty, because, as I said, a lot of the Tuareg men are way over 7 feet tall, even today. So right after that period of a few centuries where they ruled as Almoravidun, then you have the Almohad dynasty of the Masmuda. And the Masmuda groups are also described by Abu Shama and Nasir Khusraw of Iran, or Central Asia, and other Ibn Butlan and others as black, stocky built men. Okay, they made up 20,000 soldiers of the Fatimids, and they were described as black skinned. So the Masmuda were the largest group in the Atlas. Okay, they were originally in the upper plains of Morocco, and they settled in the Atlas, Southern Atlas. And the Northern Atlas was taken over by the Zanata, but the Masmuda, the Almohad dynasty, was the Masmuda Berber dynasty. Okay. And then, of course, after that, you have a few other dynasties. One which was related to the Zagawa, again, the Zanata. The Berbers were so influential in horse breeding at that time that the word Genet actually comes from the word Zeneta or Zenata, meaning that group of Berbers that came to, were predominant in certain early periods, especially the Nafsawa, Azwaga or Zawaga, and other groups. The same groups of people, however, also settled, like I said, in the Sudan, and that's why you have a horse culture across the Sudan that was also meaning the area between the Red Sea and the Atlantic. When I say the Sudan, Bilad Sudan.
Yeah.
Even though the word Bilad Sudan also originally meant Arabia and an area extending to Indonesia.
So would you say that's the modern day Sahel?
No, the Sudan is no. The Sahel is included in the Sudan. The Sudan refers to the lands of the black people that were south of the Sahara, mainly. Actually, even the Sahara was included in the Sudan up until a late period, because Ghana, sometimes the area of Zayla in Libya was referred to as part of Ghana, the Empire of Ghana. Sometimes Gadames in Libya was referred to as Sudania. So Sudania, meaning the lands of, peoples of the Sudan. So a lot of the area just directly south of North Africa was part of Sudan until the late period. Bilad of Sudan. I was going to say, yeah, and the name Africa actually referred to, or the Africani actually occupied what's now called Tunisia. So a lot of peoples, again, that were in the north have since, moved south or either amalgamated with non-African peoples. And that's how you get modern peoples of modern Morocco, northern Morocco, and the far north of Algeria, because if you move even south into what's called the south of Algeria, which is really central Algeria, into Namibia, you still find a lot of these places occupied by, or at least up until colonial times, occupied by black people. And then the same thing for Tunisia. The Zagawa peoples occupied Zogatania, which was a district, or Zogas, a district of Carthage. And that is why the Portuguese claimed that the Azwaga people were said to have been the founders of Carthage, or Karat Hadas. So all these people, African people, were considered to be descendants of Berbers, of Canaanites, of Phoenicians, of the peoples that founded Carthage and Fez, Sijil Massa, Tunis, Kairouan, and places in northern Libya, Gadames, Jebel Nafusa, places now being taken over by other people. Misrata was the name of a Tuareg tribe, okay, that once were settled between the Tuareg. Misrata were part of a group of people of Tuareg affiliation settled between northern Libya, actually Tunisia, and Jordan. They were called Aylanab, and they were considered Qais Ibn Aylan were part of that original group of peoples. In the Bible called Elan. So the Gulf of Ela or Aylan actually refers to that. So Yaqubi said these people were called Aylanab because in the time of their brethren, the Misraim, they settled in the area called Egypt, and were spread between, the area of Ayla and Kufa in Libya. And that refers to thousands of years, ago, like several centuries BC. Now the Tuareg claim that they came 9 centuries before Alexander the Great from Canaan into North Africa. That is their belief. They still wear what is called, by the Greeks, the Phoenician purple. We call it indigo, or blue. The blue in veils, So it's that is what is called by the Greeks Phoenician purple. Okay?
That's amazing. That tradition goes back that far.
This purple is still made by the peoples in Jordan that are black, that are called Beni Kenana, which have been called for thousands of years and which are trying to make into white people. Beni Kenana and other tribes of Arab peoples have always lived in Jericho and this Transjordanian area for thousands of years. The Nabataeans have always lived in this area. And the word Nabit, according to the medieval Arabs, meant the black man. Okay, so I talk about in my book how these Nabate, who became the tribes of, I don't know if you're a Muslim or regular.
I'm not of a religion, but I am spiritual. Just don't do modern faith.
The Muslims know what's called the Ansar, or groups called Khazraj, Aus, and Kaza that lived in the Hijaz and extending up into Jordan. So in my book, I show how these Nabate people were actually part of the Aus group of the Ansar, okay, who are called, usually described as black and as giants. The reason they're described as giants is because they're very big, tall people. Not just tall, but huge boned people, according to the documents. Okay, so I always like to tell the story of Ubadah bin Samit, the leader, the Umayyad leader, from Hijaz, part of the Khazraj tribe, who invaded Egypt, one of the first Arab tribes to invade Egypt. He brought with him a lot of his kinsmen who were all the same color, complexion. But because he was so huge, the Byzantine leader of Egypt said, "Get this black man away from me. He scares me." And so Ubadah bin Samit claimed that, okay, I scare you. Wait till I bring back my 1,000 kinsmen or 1,000 people from the Hijaz, blacker than me, or black as me and scarier than me, whatever. This is in their sources. Fut al Misra. I think it's Fut al Misra. Conquest of Egypt. Okay, and Ubadah bin Samit was from the Khazraj tribe. He's described as over 8 feet tall. A lot of the early people of Arabia, or the leaders, are described as over 8 feet tall, and this is where you get the depictions of the Saracens as being giants as well. Giant, black, and Jewish, because a lot of these people that settled in the Hijaz were from the original Israelites. So Ubadah bin Samit's name is, Ubadah was a Nabataean deity and Samit was a Nabataean deity, and the Khazraj and the early Khazraj Ansar people were descendants of these Nabataean people that once were settled up into the region of Petra and Jordan. If you know the Nabataeans, I'm talking about the people who founded, according to Arab sources, civilization. The Arab sources are what says that these people founded civilization. They were the first to build buildings, to put seeds in the ground, to do writing, agriculture, mathematics and things of that sort. Okay, that's what the Arab sources will tell you. That is why it is paramount that people learn Arabic. It is the language, first of all. Now, the Nabataeans spoke an early form of Aramaic because the Arameans and the Semitic peoples came from the south and developed these dialects. The Nabataeans were claimed, are still there, by the way, in places like Gar, Mazra, Gar, Safia. They're also called, according to the Arabic sources, Chaldeans. So this is where the word Chaldean and Kazdim came from. I don't know if you saw this already in my text.
Go ahead.
But what is important to know is that all these people came from an area south of Mecca called Canaana or Canania. And this is where the original Canaanites came from. The Canaanites stretching from the Yemen to near Hijaz or in Hijaz to Hama. Okay, and these people moved northward. According to Arabic sources, again, the Nabit people moved from part of Yemen called Talaba, okay, or Talabia. In the Bible, it's called Shalaban, okay, meaning foxes.
Okay.
So it's important to know the etymology of the background of the words that we're talking about. But now, Kano in Nigeria comes from the same word as Kane or Kain. Balkane, okay, refers to the nest, the beak of the bird, what do you call it? Metals, and the blacksmith. It refers to, the blacksmith, the smith. So Cain was the person who killed with his tools, weapon in allegory. He killed his brother. Okay. That's where that comes from. And these Cain people, or Bel Cain, were part of the Bela. Well, you know what? It's hard for me to talk about this because people don't know where Arabia is situated, and these people were situated in Arabia. But I'll leave it with the Nabataeans. The Nabataeans were next to Sinai in Jordan and also in the Gara area, and that other peoples from the south of Arabia moved up into the Hijaz, like the Huda people or Qanais people, called Kanaz in the Bible. Okay, and they had all these Judean, these were the peoples originally of Judah.
Okay.
These were the peoples originally of the Nethanim. I have actually, I don't know if you saw on my one of my academic sites, academia.com, com that you were on.
I do, yeah. I think we're talking on there. We've got
yeah, and I talk about the posts I put up. Okay, I've had many top-rated scholars, and I'm talking about Western, not Black scholars, from Oxford and places like that come to my site, come to my conferences, okay, that are about these groups of Arabian peoples who are still known by their biblical names, the names of Nahor, Terah, all that stuff. Dedan, Nimrod, and I talk about them because it's important to know how Nigerians, a lot of the Nigerians, the Yoruba, and people that got their names, or where they're, how these people, Berry people, came into Nigeria with these same names and allegories. So Odudawa and Lamudu, I talk about being Udadis or Dedan and Nimrod. It's the same, and these so-called pagan deities are actually deified ancestors.
Mm.
So I don't know if you're familiar with Nigerian mythology.
Yeah, I am. It's a little bit. I know some of the deities. I'm not.
Yeah. But a lot of the deities, so-called African pagan gods, are just deified ancestors that are all mentioned in ancient Egypt and in early Arabic and Hebrew sources, because they all came from one group of people called Afro-Asiatics that were settled in the Nile Valley and went into Arabia. There's a large civilization dating back several thousand years BC between Arabia and the Sudan, I'm talking about the Nilotic area. But this even goes back even earlier, because you see certain tokens that were found in Karga in Sudan that are found in Indonesia and in early Sumer, 11,000 BC.
Mm.
People were trading between Africa and Mesopotamia and the Far East and settling in these areas many thousands of years BC. And those civilizations just continued to grow up until this Afro-Arabian civilization that led to the birth of Hebrew civilization, so-called Hebrew civilization, and the, David and Solomon and all those people. But so the
That's very fascinating.
Yeah, the Egyptian cosmogony also is connected to the Hebrew Kabbalistic allegory. It's about Abraham, Brahma, Sarah, Saraswati, Heracles or Hera. It's they're all connected. That is why it's important to take back the ancestry of the Hebrews and of these the Greek mythology is based on all of this as well. That's why Herodotus or Homer said that all the ancient Greek gods were from Ethiopia, or were Ethiopian originally. The name Yapa is the root of the word Yapa was an ancient Sabian ruler. That is where the name Yethi comes from, Yethiop, the Ethiopians. See, these are very, very ancient inscriptions we're talking about.
So once again, you would argue that Ethiopian is not an exonym, that's an indigenous term.
Well, the Greeks used to have what's called punning homonyms. So the troglodytes became troglodytes, troglodyte became troglodyte, Yathiapa became Ethiop, the black-faced. They made different connections between the ancient indigenous words and their own, For example, the troglodytes did occupy caves on both sides of the Red Sea. There was Arabian troglodyte area and the Ethiopian troglodytes, but they were basically the same people. And these people still occupied large cavernous areas on both sides of the Red Sea, extending to Oman. Those were the Ethiopian troglodytes, or otherwise called the Arabian troglodytes. They were also the great archers that the Persians talk about. The Ethiopian archers were on both sides of the Red Sea. That is why in Arabic sources, you'll hear the Kara tribes talked about as being the archers of the Arabs, because the Kara people, who are actually on both sides of the Red Sea as different clans related to Somalis and other Djiboutians. These people were, who part of the Canaanite people were called Ethiopians at that time. So the area of the Himyarites was called Canaan and Cush. Himyar or Humer is in the Bible called Hamor, king of Canaan. Okay. So yeah, it's fascinating. That's why we have to learn Arabic, learn Genesis, at least learn about Genesis, because, well, I have a course that I'm teaching now that links together all of these groups of people and their connection to different Africans and their traditions, because a lot of West Africans do claim to have come from the Yemen or else from Canaan, and to have been kicked out by Sargon and Nebuchadnezzar and people like that. I'm just trying to explain why. And that there is evidence of movement of peoples, archaeological evidence of these people, especially in the rock art, moving westward into Africa.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. My mom's from a city called Ijebu, that's in Ijesha land. And Ijebu, the people there will tell you that Ijebu is the ancient name for Sheba. So they'll tell you, yeah. So they'll tell you plain face that they are from Sheba, and that they actually believe the Queen of Sheba came from Ijebu. So yeah.
Oh well, no, I don't believe that, but I do believe that these queens of Saba or Sheba actually did, have something to do with the occupancy of not only the queens, but the King Solomon too is said to have connection with the settlement of people in places like Wargla and all these places that the original Songhai came from before they settled in the Sudan. Now the Yoruba are connected to these groups of people called Kwana Dukan that settled also in the area from the south and mixed with indigenous people.
But Yoruba have a lot of dialects there, to be clear. So in Yoruba, you have a lot of surrounding people who have been absorbed, so to speak, by Yoruba and speak Yoruba. Like my dad's from Idare, but the people from Idare, Ondo State, they originate from Benin. So they're Beninites historically, but they now speak a Yoruba dialect, the entire Ondo State.
Okay. So that's why I always tell Yoruba people, I say, because I have certain Nigerians that come on and argue with me and talk about, like, oh, well, our history is such and such. But the Yoruba history actually is a blend of different peoples that came over many centuries into the area. They're connected to the, like I said, the Dukan Kwana also, that were connected to the Hausa. And the Hausa were connected to the Kanuri. And the Kanuri were connected to the Zadai and Songhai. The Sonink were connected to the Kisei people like the ancestors of who was it? The Kaya Maga people and the people of Agadis, the Askias. So all this, these groups of traders settled in different places in West Africa, and they were connected and a lot of the allegories claim connection to, places like Wargla and other places, like Ghana in Mauritania, Wargla in Nigeria. This is where they originally had settled in the time of Sheba, or the Queens of Sheba, and Queen of Sheba and Solomon. They'll tell you that. Even in Algeria, they'll say, we were founded by Sheba. So that's why you have similar allegories in other parts of West Africa. So, now the people in Algeria, these areas, Gadames, Garama, or Jerma, and northern or central Algeria and central Tunisia, all these places are occupied by the same people, but these people have been mixed with, peoples in the north, as well as some other types of Africans from further south that were not part of, they were brought up as slaves further south. But, for the most part, these were all very people, or Berber people, in places like Touggourt in Algeria, Guerrera, Morgla. All these people were connected to the Gnawa or Janawa, founders of the Ghana, the town of Ghana, which became an empire. Okay, and all these people, the Sonic people, the Bafur people, Imaraguan, who were actually the vassal caste of the Sanhaja Berbers, moved further south and settled across the Sudan. And you had great civilizations, the most wealthy civilizations in the world in the Sudan, according to Arabic sources. Wealthiest people, the best dressed people in the world. This is actually before 15th century. So Ghana and Mali and Songhai were developed out of this conglomeration of people that had once occupied areas of Sahel and, even Sahel and Sahara, and even further north.
Very interesting. A quick question about, you mentioned them briefly, the Saracens. I'd love to know, is it correct to distinguish between Saracens and black people?
Well, the earliest Saracens, as I say, were Arab, black-skinned Arab people, the original occupants of Hijaz, Tahama, Yemen, Central Arabia, even northern parts of Saudi Arabia, which was known as Shem in that time, the land of Shem. But what happened was, and Yemen was known as the land of Ham, but Shem was considered Central Arabia and the Hijaz. What happened was, both Saracen came to refer like Moor to Muslim early on, because the Kurds and other peoples came to rule in the Fatimid period over the Arabs and stuff. The Turkish Kurds came to rule, and the name Saracen was, actually came to refer to those people as well, different Turkish people. But you will see in the Crusader text, of course, 11th century, 12th century Crusader text, that the Saracen applies to only people blacker than soot.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what the itinerary of King Richard says. Itinerarium Peregrinorum talks about the Saracen and the Moors, and both were black, especially the Saracens, blacker than soot. Saracens specifically refer to the peoples from Yemen that had come, settled in Ramallah, Akko, or Acre, and Acre, the Deir Bala, different parts of Palestine and Jordan in the Muslim era. Okay, so the Thai parts of the Madij, or Taj, that's people named Taj. Taj Mahal comes from the early Arab presence there. So these Tayani people were called otherwise Saracens in the Crusader sources. Originally they were called black, but later on this word referred to other Muslims in general. So
that's brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, the Madij groups in Arabia were in the south of the Yemen, and they include the Thai, the Jara. In Hebrew sources, well, when I say Hebrew, I'm talking about the European Hebrew sources. Banu Jara are described as Kushim, or the black people, or the black slaves, because by that time the term Ham referred exclusively to black people, especially Arab people, not African. Canaanites and Cushites were Arab people. The name Cush referred to the southern parts of Tahama until the medieval period in Arabic sources, as well as the area of Zabid today. Zabid, which came the tribe of Zubayd, another tribe of the Saracens that came up. But the Saracens in Hijaz and the Az people are also the early peoples of the Gafik that invaded, in the time of Chanson de Roland, they invaded Iberia, and that's where the term Saracen comes in, or you see paintings of early Saracen giants, okay, and descriptions of them as black and giants. Originally, a lot of these people were Jewish, so they're also referred, all of these people came to be, affiliated with the devil due to the fact they were all one people at that time. Jews, black people, Arab people.
Yeah.
That was one group of people at that early medieval time. Descendants of Canaan and Cush. Even the Canaanites, who were the bringers of Yahweh, were part of the Hamathite Canaanite groups. When you see the Moors talked about as being descendants of Canaanites, they're talking about groups that were spread from Jordan and the Levant, or Palestine and Jordan, into Sinai, and further westward into, Libya, and finally Morocco. So Strabo actually talks about an early time when Ethiopians took over the whole coast of Africa, North Africa, North Africa. And he's talking about these Canaanite Phoenician people who are later called by Joseph as children of Rama, Saba, and Sabteka. And by the way, in Arabic, and the Targums too talk about that Mori was Rama. And that Mazig was Dedan, or Udades, who is further south called Al-Dudawa. What was I going to say? Anyway, these Ethiopian people, in Arabic sources, Canaan is sometimes referred to as the son of Cush. Cush is also referred to as the son of Canaan. So it depends on what you're looking at, but those also are considered one and the same Arabian people. So these Canaan people still occupied, in the time of the early Islamic invasion, still occupied Hijaz. Canaan ibn Khuzaimah, Kara ibn Khuzaimah, who was the brother of, Khuzaimah was the brother of Mudrika, who was the father of Hudhail, or the Hudhail. So all these groups of closely related peoples that were closely related to the prophet remained kind of pure in their ancestry. They didn't want to mix with other people. So up until very late, even today, you'll find Canana or Canania people still black. These Beni Canana are the people who named the Canana region, and where do you get the name Canaanite? And the Huzzail people, now they've been gone. They're gone, and that was just up until, like I say, the early 20th century that Charles Dalty refers to them as, black.
When you say they're gone, is that an ethnicity that has disappeared, been absorbed, or genocided?
I think they've probably been absorbed, either that or, I don't know, people just took their names, because that happened a lot in our history. But if you look at the YouTube videos, you'll see people calling themselves Hudhail, and you won't see a single dark-skinned person. Same thing for Medina, one of the capitals of the Hijaz, one of the major cities of Hijaz. In the 20th century, or late 18th century, late 19th century, an Ottoman photographer was there. He described the people of Medina. Medina and Mecca were very important places for the early Islamic peoples.
Okay.
Medina was occupied by originally was a Yathrib, called Yathrib after Jethro, but Medina was the area where the early Ansar, or companions, lived, and the Sulaim tribe of Sulaim ibn Mansur. Anyway, that area was occupied by the Ansar until very late, until the time of the Ottomans. And the Ottoman writer and photographer said that most of the people of Medina are black. There are only a very few pale people among them. Now, if you go to Medina today, will you see a black person?
It's
very few. Very few. So that's one place
It's
to go.
bizarre how quickly they've managed to
Yeah,
completely ethnically. I mean, they talk about ethnic cleansing, but that's literally the definition of it, isn't it?
yeah. So I don't know what happened to those people, but they're not there anymore. A lot of people,
Scary.
Yemenite tribes, a lot of people aren't there anymore. They're being pushed into other places and being called Africans or slaves and stuff like that.
Mm.
Now there are some of the people in Arabia today are descendants of slaves. There were a lot of slaves brought up in the Ottoman period, but there are certain places that have been documented as well before the Ottoman period as being black. Among them are Medina, the home of one of the capitals of the Jews of Arabia. As I say, in Khaybar, another capital, Jewish capital in Arabia, occupied up until the 16th century by small black people, or people closer to black than any other color, according to an Italian explorer there. But of course, now most of the people there are not black. We do have a few, but they're, I think, probably late comers. And the Sulaim bin Mansur and the Hawazin bin Mansur occupied the areas of Hijaz around Medina. Benjamin Tudela, a Jew of Italian or Spanish origin, claimed in the 11th century that these people were said to be the tribes of Manessa. So Mansur is actually the plural for Manasir. The Sulaim ibn Mansur, who are described as black as lava, and the Hawazin ibn Mansur, whose descendants are now the black people of Iraq, were once occupying the areas of Central Arabia as well. Those people were the Israelites, the people of Manasseh. The Israelites themselves came out of Canaan. Abraham, and you see, it's a long story, but even the plain of Sennar, that's talking about in the Bible, refers not to the area in Mesopotamia, but to an Arabian area. A lot of the rivers, Euphrates, Tigris, Pishon, another, was it Hiddekel? These rivers are also in Arabia, and that's what the Bible refers to, not to places in the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. And Africans also talk about the Euphrates as being their homeland. They're not talking about Mesopotamia, they're talking about the one in Arabia, near the clan of, near Nedron, near Besh, what's called the Besh area. But anyway, it's a whole thing, and I'm teaching a course on it as we speak, now. And if anybody would like to take the course, they can go to your, I guess, YouTube video and see it.
Right, so I wanted to get a bit of expansion about some of those groups that you mentioned earlier. You talked about the Maori Berbers, the Maori Bagut, the Maori Mazig, I think you said. I'd love to get a little bit of expansion on those.
Yeah, those were the early groups between Tunisia and Mauritania. In fact, Tacitus, though, says that the early Moors came out of the Masils and Masacili, who occupied Numidia. So these groups of Numidia actually are also found in the Horn of Africa in the Roman era. The Masili and the Macae, Macae, and the Masili, Massyli, the Masacili. Those tribes became what were known as the Moors, and were ruled by early Moorish rulers like Juba and people of that sort. Massinissa in Algeria and Morocco. But so Procopius is one of the first Byzantine writers that really explains that the Moors were black-skinned. He lived in the fifth century. Most of these Byzantine people that talk about the Moors being black, they lived between the 3rd century and the 6th century AD. Before that, the earlier classical writers, Pliny, Strabo, Ptolemy, those people were of the 1st century AD or BC. And Josephus too, about 1st century AD. Josephus, early Jewish Roman, a Roman of Jewish persuasion. So, for example, Pliny mentioned that the troglodyte area was occupied by what was called the Midaean. So, this troglodyte area was occupied by the Midianites, or Median, and Medan, or children of Keturah, and Epher. So that's why you still find the Afar people that crossed over into from Hadramaut into the troglodyte area, which is Somalia, the Somalia area. Okay, Afar and Anakil or Danakil are still there. So we know that when Joseph was saying that these people were in troglodyte Ethiopia, and that Judatis also, or Judan, the brother of Median and Medan and Jokshan, or descendants of Jokshan and Keturah. I think Jokshan was the brother. They all settled in Ethiopia, and Josephus said that the Asurim or Surim, brother of Median and Medan, as well as Dedan or Eudatus, the other brother, moved into Western Ethiopia, became the Western Ethiopians. So Dedan is also the name of a Tuareg tribe called Itutan. And that is why the Targums, like I said, the Targums say Dedan was called Mazig. The word Titan also comes from this word, Dedan. The Tanu was associated with the Amorites, another giant tribe. So all these names are related and related to these early groups that moved from Arabia back into Africa. But the Asurim also were said to have colonized Syria and harassed and named Assyria as well as Syria. Okay? That's a reference to the Nabataeans, who, as I said, had moved northward after the 8th century AD and colonized a lot of these areas, just like Strabo said, harassed and settled all these areas.
When you mentioned Habatians earlier, Nabataeans, yes, Nabataeans. It sounded like the history that you were relating to them as in being the first people to do certain things like agriculture. It seemed to relate somewhat to a group called the Natufians, who I don't know if you've heard of. Is there any relationship between those two groups?
That's an archaeological term for a place in the Levant or northern, was it Palestine or Syria? Someplace in Syria. But it was an early movement of Mesolithic, meaning long before a historic period, peoples from Africa into the Levant. And there were several groups that moved from Africa into Levant in that period. But I'm talking about much later, during the historic periods, when we're talking about 8th century BC, and with Mesolithic, you can be talking about as far back as 12th century.
I thought you were going back further than that because you talked about obviously the early.
Sorry, 12th millennium BC.
Okay.
We're talking about when you're talking about Mesolithic period. This is the time when a lot of Africans were one of the early migrations of Africans. Not the earliest, but one of the times when they were bringing agriculture and things of that sort. Yes, but when they're talking about the Nabataeans, they're talking about the early people that lived in southern Arabia, because that was like the early, like I said, there was a whole civilization between Africa and southern Arabia that these Afro-Asiatic groups had brought early civilization to the area, as well as domestication of animals.
So what kind of dates are we looking for the Nabataeans then?
Well, when they're talking about Nabataeans, they're just talking about, when they started building like civilization in Babylon or Mesopotamia, the ziggurats.
Oh, okay. So, okay.
Ziggurats and, before the Sabians and things like that, because they are also called the Sabians. The Nabataeans are called early Sabians.
Got it.
Sabians, actually, the Sabio-Manaean group civilization goes back to before the 11th century BC.
Okay.
Wait, I'm confusing things. Yeah, before the so we're talking about this second millennium BC. Second millennium BC.
Yeah.
Which is, time to before Solomon and Sheba. That is the area, the time period we're talking about.
New Kingdom.
Right before that time. And in fact, I don't even talk about Egypt because that chronology is completely messed up. It had nothing. You cannot even relate it together with Egypt. That chronology has been so mixed up that's part of the reason why we couldn't find out where the original Israelites and Mitzrayim came from. Okay, the Mitzrayim have nothing to do with Egypt, and Manetho's chronology has to do more with the coming of the Mitzrayim to Egypt than it does Egypt. Yeah, that's a whole other mishmash of things that needs to be straightened out first. But yeah, so the peoples, for example, the name Pharaoh comes from the Amalekite people. Okay, another name for the Tuareg or Philistine people that used to live in the Eritrean Sea area, Canaan, or Sea of Harith. That's where that comes from, Sea of Harith. And so the Amalekites had an early pharaoh named Pharaoh or Pharaoh. Descendants of Pharaoh were called Pharaoh. These Pharaoh, actually, the name Ephraim also comes from this word, Ephraim or Ephraim.
Wow. Okay.
That's why in the Bible it says Ephraim, whose roots were in Amalek.
Oh.
So the Tuareg still are called Ephraim. The Tuareg are still called Ephraim in parts of Africa, south of Sahara. And they're also known in texts as the Amalek. Amalek were people that lived in the south of Arabia up until colonial periods when they're talked about next to the Mara. So we're not talking about legendary people, we're talking about real people. That was their name, Amalek. Amalek and the Horites and the Israelites and the Moabites, all these names are still in South Arabia. Okay? In places like Hadramaut and the southern parts of the Yemen where the black people still live in certain of these areas. And into Oman, they extended into Oman, where they became known as the Jawasim or Jassim. That's why you find in Egyptian sources or Egyptian scarab of Geshmu, the Arabian, and also in Mesopotamian sources, Geshmu, the Arabian, Gassim or Kathim, and also Josephus talks about him. But, it's a very complicated thing, but you just have to know that the Canaanites and Cushites actually in Mitzrayim refer not to East Africa at that time in the Bible, but to early regions of Southern Arabia where peoples related to and ancestral to a lot of Africans came from. And they came at different times due to either fights or due to the Assyrians. The later Assyrians came and, conquered the area of Southern Arabia and had to flee into, and not only, when I say Southern Arabia, I'm talking about Mecca too, which is in the southern part of Arabia, which had to flee into Africa. And that's how you have the early Arabian settlers in the Elephantine region who were Jews. And a lot of these people, called Sambaratai or Sambara, like I said, migrated westward. And you have a lot of the Soninke, Songhai, who were called Berbers at the time, who were Jewish due to that migration. Well, how did I get to talk to that about that? You asked me a question about something, and I went on.
Yes. I think I asked you. Well, I've almost lost myself as well. I asked you about the those terms, Mori Masili, Mori Baba, Mori.
Yeah, so those are also terms in the Red Sea area.
Yeah.
And I showed that in my blog spot too on the Moors. I was showing how the different Numidian tribes came from this Red Sea area where they settled in Africa from Arabia. Even the name Eliphaz or El Ufaysan comes from this area. The Faysan are mentioned in these inscriptions. You know, the Sabian inscriptions or Musnad inscriptions of the early Manaeans and Sabians and Himyarites talk about these different tribes of people that settled in the Horn of Africa. So they, over time, settled in Numidia and in, first in Nubia, actually. A lot of them settled in Nubia, like the Blemis, and migrated westward. The Garamantians also claim to have, or actually the modern peoples called Garama, or Gara, or Kara, they became not only the Garamantes, but also the Carians. But again, a whole other book to be written. Yeah, so it's all documented, and that's why it's important to look at that page talking about the Moors, where, why they were called black, where they came from, have the whole ethnological, origins of the Moors. Otherwise called Gatuls, and that's why Joseph said the Gatuls came from the Avaloi or Avalites, Havila, son of Cush, son of Saba, or whatever, brother of Jakshan. There was two Havilas, so one of them came to occupy India. The other, other sons of Shem came to occupy Africa, or sons of Canaan, I should say.
I can't remember where I read. It might have been yours, but I was reading even about the name of Marrakesh, which could translate to sons of Cush, or there wasn't sure. But there wasn't sure about that etymology. But the Kesh comes from Cush. Is that incorrect? I've read that. I can't remember where I read that.
I'm not sure if somebody was. No, the word Marrakesh is an Arab tribal name. Marrakesh is also an Arabian tribal name in inscriptions, and also in modern time, colonial times. Marrakesh is an Arab tribe. Now, Cush, like I said, is the name of Zabid in medieval times as well. Zabid or Sabta in modern Yemen. If you go to a map, you'll see Zabid, one of the main cities still occupied by black people. But yeah, I don't know if the word Marrakesh is related to Cush or not. I haven't done the research into that.
Oh, that was it was David McRitchie. I was trying to remember where I read it from. So that was the author who said that. I said it might have its roots there. But even I think even he said he was unsure about the etymology, but he'd heard from rumor that's where it came from.
Well, Ifrikush too. The word Ifrikush Tuba, the ruler of that came from Yemen and supposedly ruled in North Africa and Libya and gave birth to all the Berbers. That's another, the word Kush, ending Kush or Kish means something. I'm not sure if it's connected to Kush, but there's Kush on both sides of the Red Sea. There's Want on both sides of the Red Sea. There's Iram and Yam on both sides of the Red Sea. These were the same people. Some of these places were actually colonized in Arabia first and came back into the area on the coast of the Red Sea.
That's very interesting. It's funny because I guess the way, having discussed it with you and the way you present your research, it's very eye-opening. I do obviously you come into these discussions and I have a perception of how it's going to go, but then having chat with you, it's been very, very eye-opening, and I get the I guess it's somewhat I guess I didn't pick up the nuance from the various discussions you've had, but it's more clear to me now how these people moved historically from the research that you've done. It feels like there's almost been like it relates back, because I always had this theory that most of Africa's modern populations flowered out from the Green Sahara. And I guess this has a similar take, but with differences, almost like a later migration from the Saharan region into different parts of Africa.
Right.
Am I picking that up correctly? Yeah, go on.
And it's also important to remember that there was different populations in the Sahara over different periods of time. So one of the later ones was the Neolithic period, which happens to be a later, it's not as far back as we think it is in the Sahara. But so the rock art of the Sahara is similar to that of East Africa and Arabia. Okay, there's something called the Thami rock art, which is almost identical to that found in the Horn of Africa, as well as parts of Nubia and the Sahara. So that when you see the art of Tassili, for example, and stuff like that, that's not just native to those areas. It's found across Africa. These people moved different places. They weren't just in, they were traders. They had their cattle and camels. Well, camels came later. Their cattle, the Zebu cattle, for example, comes from India. The Fulani themselves say that at one point they came from India and traveled, into Anatolia and came down southward into Arabia and Africa. So we're talking about thousands of years that people have been living in this different Afro-Asiatic, global space between Indonesia and India, and even some of them went up into China at certain points, as you probably already know. And Central Asia, of course, was occupied by people of African descent till a late period. It's not until the 5th century BC that you start to see skeleton, brachycranic skeletons of the type now present in Iran. Okay, that's why you see the earliest Persians themselves are looking like Ethiopians, not like modern day Persians.
Yeah.
The early
they call they've got a theory around it. They call it the brachycephalization. So because they can't explain it using logical anthropology,
right,
they've come up with a theory that there was a rapid evolution of the skull,
right,
and it suddenly turned square after being
and
long for centuries, millennia.
Well, that was an early. I know you didn't read that recently, right? Because that was an early.
Oh no, it's an old paper, but that was right before they abandoned the entire study. That was like the last paper they made. It's like brachycephalization. That's the last thing they said about cephalometry, and now they don't even do it anymore.
Okay, yeah. So they tried to explain away the fact that there were early Anatolians and in Turkey, and the earliest Mesopotamians and the Tufians and all those people were strongly dolichocephalic, like Africans. A lot of Africans, not all Africans, but most Africans, but especially across the northern Sudan, across Ethiopia and Arabia, the entire peninsula of Arabia once occupied by these people, different black types of people. And the larger groups of, which they used to call Euro-African, were also located in Mesopotamia at one time. So, and they were called Negroid, but then later different euphemisms developed over time. And not only that, they started putting pictures of the wrong era of Mesopotamians in the books.
Yeah.
And they even had to talk about that. What's his name? One of the specialists had to say, what was this? Oh, keeps coming and going. But I talk about Spicer. Ephraim Spicer talked about how the pictures that you see in books of the early Mesopotamians are, it's disconcerting because it's so unlike the cranial forms found in the monumental representations depict brachycephalic people, while the crania in the tombs are of dolichocephalic peoples. So it didn't match because they keep putting the wrong era of people. Like the Gutian, those are probably Gutian people rather than, ancient Babylonians or Chaldeans, whatever, Kazdim. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's been deliberately, because people were in denial and could not accept the fact that black people once had civilized, the Near East and ancient South Asia, as well as North Africa, as well
Well,
as come into Europe several times.
that's what I say. If we're gonna talk about cephalometry and skull shapes, then it doesn't leave much. Do you
Yeah,
understand? So you kind of understand why the resistance is there, because it doesn't leave much for them. They
right.
have to start explaining why, you know, dolichocephaly and Habsburg's jaw, which is just a fancy way of saying prognathism, exist, throughout their nobility for so
Yeah.
long, up until recent times.
Well, I know that even Kuhn, one of the pseudo-anthropologists, racist,
Yeah, Charlie.
academics, had said that the early Mediterranean type portrayed Negroid type aspect. The small grass cell Mediterranean with Negroid in aspect. And that's all he says about it. He also said, or he and somebody else said that Isaac Asimov said that long-headedness is not found on a regional basis among Europeans at all.
Oh, it's not. It's not.
So
It's not.
just found among the people that, still have it,
Yeah.
Africans.
Yeah.
Well,
But they can turn a blind eye to it whenever they feel like. That's the thing. So
yeah.
they'll turn a blind eye to it, and then they'll say, "Oh, look, narrow nose. It's European." It's like, wait a second. What about the rest of the skull? Are we just gonna ignore that? Yeah, and pretend that Africans don't have narrow
In that case, they say,
noses.
it's a Euro-African. That's what they used to say.
Yeah. Unbelievable. I have Giuseppe Sergi's book, The Mediterranean Race, which is very fascinating.
He's not one of the bad ones. He was just trying to get rid of.
No, he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah.
Still coping though. He was still coping, wasn't he?
He wanted to be more related to Ethiopians than to Germans, so he's made Italians into this other part of the Mediterranean race, even though northern Italy especially doesn't have the dolichocephaly of Africans. But what I noticed is a lot of Sicilians do recognize that they have African blood, or the real Sicilians in Sicily. Some of them do say that, we were ruled by the Moors, by black people.
Yeah.
Palermo was called, of course, Gate of the Blacks. So, yeah. I know there's people, like there's a whole neo-Nazi wave of information that's been put out there, especially to kind of as a kickback to what I was putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Wikipedia, like you said, that site has been overrun and simply just exists to provide misinformation, So yeah, the more people like you, the more like we put the message out. Yeah, that's the resistance. But in some ways, like I said, I think first of all, the way that you do it is important. I think it's really important that it's done in academic, referenceable peer review, as you mentioned.
Otherwise, because we have a lot of people going around now that think that they're the experts in genetics, and and I have to always argue with them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There's still genetics just came out. Like I said, when I was in the University of Chicago, it came out 30 years ago. So it's a new subject, and people are trying to say, "Oh, this haplotype, this connected to this," and that. So these people are white, and I'm really sick of arguing with that kind of,
Yeah.
That's not science. That's something you read
I agree.
On the internet. So,
I agree.
yeah, as long as you have those kind of people reviewing it and making sure, because otherwise people will just come back and say, "Well, who are you?" Like people say to me today, last week somebody said, "Oh, you're just an educator, you're just a teacher," and they don't know about my degrees in anthropology and social sciences from the University of Chicago and everything, doctorate, having taught anthropology courses and stuff of that sort, So, but yeah, it's just, and you also have people putting pictures of these people online without knowing the background of, so for example, you'll see pictures that Bertram Thomas or the colonialist, they took pictures of the ancient, or excuse me, the South Arabians of their era, and they told you what their names were in their books. But you'll see now a lot of, people, African Americans especially, and some of these photo people going on and putting, oh, these are Az people, these are Mara people, just because they found out some Arabians were a lot of the black Arabs were Mara, that doesn't mean everybody's Mara. Okay, just because you see a person wearing a veil in Africa doesn't mean he's Tariq. It could be Wahhabi or Fulani. So people have to be careful. That's all I got to say.
Very good advice always. So thank you very much. Your time is very valuable, so I appreciate it. I definitely want to message you and hopefully be able to get you on for the live stream. I think my audience can learn a lot from you. But yeah, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate your time. I've got a lot of editing to do.
I appreciate your taking the time to interview me, and like I said, I like the way the British, I guess they're mostly African origin interviewers, or know a lot about the subject already and know the questions to ask and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I look forward to coming back or streaming in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.